Hello, everybody. Welcome to LivesBerg Technology. We have come up with another important topic which everybody needs to talk about. So here is the topic we'll be discussing about. We have got Advocate 𝗖𝘆𝗯𝗲𝗿, who is the CEO, 𝗖𝘆𝗯𝗲𝗿 IT Law Associates. He is the cyber law expert and techno-legal consultant. Welcome to LivesBerg webinar, Advocate 𝗖𝘆𝗯𝗲𝗿.
Thank you so much.
All right. So you already know that I'm your moderator. I am Pooja Malhotra and I'm Director and CEO of LivesBerg Technologies. Today, we are going to have discussion on cyber security, cyber laws for educators, for parents, and for students. We are moving on IT tech world where the sessions in the schools and in colleges are happening online. However, we must also be aware of the securities, the policies, the limitations around how to use the online webinars and online video sessions. So we will be talking about cyber security breaches in schools and colleges by students, real-time case scenarios, cyber law and in schools and colleges, cyber crime, legal policies for schools and colleges, and cyber security guidelines. Thank you for joining this session. Before that, we go ahead and talk about what is LivesBerg Technologies. We are the world's first global incubation program for entrepreneurs below 20 years. What does this mean? That we mentor and inspire kids to become entrepreneur and financially independent while they are still studying in schools. And there have been thousands of examples where the kids already studying in school are independent. They are either YouTubers or have opened their own organizations. We work on the mindsets. And if you want to enroll your kids for the online startup mindset or success mindset workshop, then of course you can connect with us. So going ahead for cyber security, cyber laws for educators, parents, and students, we want to highlight one thing. And yes, there are a handful of kids, those who think that they may create kiosk while the online sessions are going on, but nobody is going to catch hold of them. They are actually unaware of the cyber laws and cyber policies. These kids, those who are handful of them and create mess while the sessions are going on, they are unaware of these policies and securities, which is very important for them as well to learn, because now onwards, they are not going to easily get away with what they are creating. And to rest of the kids, those who stay in their limits, I salute you for you being disciplined. So now we move on to talking to Mr. 𝗖𝘆𝗯𝗲𝗿. So here is the question, first of all, for you, 𝗖𝘆𝗯𝗲𝗿, that with online education, what could be specific due diligence which teachers, faculty need to look at from cyber legal perspective? Over to you, 𝗖𝘆𝗯𝗲𝗿.
Well, good morning to all of you who are watching this webinar, and good morning, Pooja. Thank you so much for inviting me to this webinar on cyber security, cyber laws for educators, students, and parents. It's a pleasure talking to you this morning. And then it's a very interesting domain. So I thought of just collating some of the real life scenarios that have come before me, as well as suggesting a few cyber security measures that educators, schools, colleges, faculty, and specifically students and parents need to keep in mind as they are going in the era of digital classrooms. So going to the first question that you posed, what is the specific kinds of due diligence? I would say the first point is that you have to please understand what kinds of tools have been used by your educational institutions for the purpose of hosting online classes. I think that would be the first area to check and have a due diligence on the kinds of tools being used, because there are lots of tools available for online which enable you to have virtual sessions and digital classrooms. The first area is look at the tool that is being used by your educational institution, and the second thing is please do have a look at some kinds of policies that have been made available on these respective tools. For example, when we look at this application called Zoom, I think by and large, we'll have to admit that there have been a lot of security breaches, especially from a cyber security perspective, as a lot of people facing different kinds of issues like unauthorized access, people getting into without even proper authorization. There have been some instances where in live sessions, some pornography content was displayed and something going out of control. I think primarily the first due diligence that I would suggest to all the people, irrespective of whether they are faculty, whether they are educational institutions, or whether they're parents, or whether they're students, the first thing is please understand the tool. Please look at the policies. Please do have a check whether your information is shared with anyone else, what kind of content is shared, with whom all is it shared, and for what purpose is it shared. Because primarily what happens when you look at these policies is, I know that you're not lawyers, you're not legal professionals to understand it, but primarily when you look at the privacy and the security aspect, I think that is very important when you're using a tool. So it is important that you understand the tool and also have adequate security settings while making use of the tool, either as a host or as a participant, to ensure that your exposure to these kinds of criminal activities goes down to the bare minimum. I think this is the first key advice that I would like to tell you before you take on any digital classroom. And the second important due diligence that I would like to talk of is, please do ensure that there are some stipulated guidelines being issued by the educational institution in terms of digital classrooms. I think this is very, very essential in order to ensure that there are proper guidelines being formulated by the educational institution, so as to ensure that things are running smooth and in a organized manner. Though the intentions are noble, but however, I think it's a different ball game altogether going on, the digital classroom versus physical classroom. I think this is one more area that I would say that increasingly students, parents, and also faculty need to very specifically look at from a due diligence perspective, to ensure and also instill upon the minds of your educational institutions to have adequate guidelines while hosting such online programs. I think these are the two things that I would like to start off. I think I would try to give you more and more kinds of due diligence mechanisms as we go forward. But primarily, I thought of just bringing in these two. And one last important aspect that I would like to tell you is, if you're a victim or if you face any kinds of cyber-related security breaches, or you're a victim to any of the cyber crimes in any of the sessions, I would encourage you to first report the same. You have two options to report. One thing, you can report using the tool made available, whether it's Zoom or whether it's Google Meet and the like. You can make use of the reporting options. This is why I said please look at the policies of the tool, so that you will be able to understand and report any kinds of cyber security breaches or unauthorized access. The second thing is, please do inform the faculty, and also please inform the educational institution regarding the breach. So as a parent, as a student, as a faculty, I think these are the three key areas that you need to really stay focused while you're making use of digital classrooms. I think these are the three things that I would like to call as wristbands in order to handle and counter any cyber security breaches happening live in any video conferencing sessions and digital classrooms. So I think these tools have become the new playgrounds for all cyber criminals, because there are a lot of cyber criminal activities that are taking place increasingly, not just with the content being displayed, but it's also not the faculty alone, but even it's the students who are actually trying to face some kinds of intentional or unintentional damages when you're actually passing through this phase of digital classrooms. I think these are some things that I would like to start off, and then more we will discuss as we move forward to the session.
Very wonderfully said, Advocate Sushant. So what we are trying to say is that if you encounter any incident, if you're faculty, if you're a parent or a kid, ensure that first of all you're reporting it. And now we are going to learn more from Mr. Sushant.
Okay, I think the whole log of digital classrooms is going to pose in a lot of different kinds of cyber security, ethical and legal policies and regulatory issues. because this has never happened so far. I think we can classify this phase as AC and BC and AC, before Corona and after Corona. I think it's going to pose in a lot of different cyber legal principles. I personally believe that we are all in the process of getting migrated into a new cyber world, which is going to see a new cyber legal order post COVID-19. I think that's going to be an interesting era where there could be a lot of legal challenges and a lot of work needs to be done in this area. So as we move forward, typically this is the kind of expression I see on the face of people when usually you find that a lawyer is addressing you, especially in this kind of an webinar. So I hope that, since I'm not able to connect and see each one of you who are attending this webinar, your video specifically, I think this would be the typical facial expression that I could see. I'm hoping that I could change that as we go forward, because this is one piece of subject that is very, very boring. You know why? Because it's here since centuries. Unlike the other fields which go on increasing, I think this is one area which is constantly here since centuries. But nevertheless, this piece of law, that is cyber law, is very interesting space because it's totally a technology-dependent law, unlike the other laws. So it's going to be very interesting and fascinating to look at the various cutting-edge techno-legal solutions and problems which are being encountered during this migration to digital platforms. Next slide, please.
Yeah, said very correctly that yes, this is after Corona, and though this topic is boring, but then it can save us from a lot of toll. So yes, it is important for all of us to learn about it.
I would like to start off with one such case study that has come before me. So we see that a lot of classes are now being made digital, and there are lots of classrooms and tools, including Zoom or the WebEx or the Google Meets or Hangouts and the like. There have been a lot of tools which schools and educational institutions are increasingly making use of for the purpose of conducting their digital classes. So in this kind of a scenario, I got this case a couple of days back when the lockdown just started. So basically, there was an education institution in Hyderabad which was trying to go digital, and then it is in its mail to all the faculties and the students emphasized that everybody who's attending this digital classrooms are supposed to be present in video. So there was a mention of in video attendance for the classrooms. So everything was hunky-dory, well, and then the classroom started operating, and then classes started to operate from 9 in the morning till 1 in the afternoon. So in this kind of a scenario, yes, one class also happened in the morning between 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. And evening at around 7 o'clock, the faculty who has hosted one of the classes started receiving calls on her mobile phone. She was absolutely stuck. Why? Because people started talking to her in a different language, different tone, and they started to tell her that we would provide special lockdown services, and then we're a group of 10 people. Is there a discount that you're providing because there are 10 of us? And she really did not understand what was happening, and it was totally a surprise to all to her that she started receiving. And not just one call, there were a flow of calls between 7 and 8 in the evening. And then slowly she started understanding what has exactly happened. So she went on to social media. She started looking at Facebook. She started searching about her name on Facebook. But she was absolutely shocked to see that there was a fake profile being created of hers. And then the real details, like the real phone number, email ID, and the address and the name was actually displayed. And to her surprise, the same photograph, the people have taken screenshot of the video meeting that has taken place in the morning, the video session, and then copy pasted the whole thing, and then used a photo editor to bring about that as a profile picture. And then she absolutely got stunned because people started to call her, and then there was a mention that these kinds of services were offered by her during the lockdown. I think this is one learning lesson that all of us need to really understand, because when you specify that there are in video classrooms, I think specifically from a school or an education institution's perspective, I think it's very, very important that you formulate a guideline and also state why this particular video meeting was actually emphasized. Failing to do so would expose you to two kinds of liabilities, which is civil and criminal. We'll be discussing about that shortly. But however, there is also going to be a lapse on the due diligence from the education institutions perspective in case they do not have such guidelines. That's the first learning. And the second learning is for the faculties who are actually trying to host. It's equally important that you also have to keep in mind and also emphasize on your educational institutions the need for having such in-video classes. Because as a faculty, if you do not emphasize and get proper information or convey the same to your educational institution, I think that is also talking about your lapse of due diligence. And the last thing is about the students. Well, even the students and the parents who are actually making use of these digital classrooms would also have to emphasize on the school to specifically have these guidelines specifically addressing in video requirements. I think this is the learning takeaway that you could probably get from this particular case study. So I thought of just bringing in this so as to ensure that we do not miss out some kinds of issues relating to cybersecurity. So this is one interesting case study that I thought of sharing it with you. So next slide, please. Yes, like I said, a lot of times cyber criminals are displaying all sorts of information on the social medias and creating fake profiles, and then they're actually trying to give up invitations to offer with the help of these photographs that they captured during this video sessions. I think these are all cyber sadistic pleasures, and they require not just treatment from a cyber security or a legal perspective, but also from a mental health perspective. I think mental health has also started to emerge as one of the key disciplines, especially during this time of digital adoption. So this is one area that they thought of just making people aware, because it could be anybody. So each one of us could either be a potential attacker or a victim. So with or without our knowledge. So be very careful on sharing out videos and sharing out your camera settings. And I would encourage that in case your classroom does not require in-video attendance, I would advocate that none of the students, not the faculty, turn on their video cameras so as to ensure that they're reasonably protected in terms of their privacy, as well as in terms of protecting themselves from situations like this. Next slide, please. This is one more such instance that I thought of sharing it with you. So there was another classroom that was actually made using Google platform. I don't want to name the specific tool because there are witnesses present here and there could be a lot of legal challenges for me as well. So one educational institution made use of a application other than Zoom because they thought Zoom was unsafe, and they could make use of one such tool that was very easily adaptable, which is supported by Google. I think little did they realize that this tool actually had a vulnerability which was able to give access to any person who had a Gmail ID. So basically, any person with a Gmail ID could actually log into the session and actually try to pose questions and do all sorts of activities as a participant in that particular digital classroom. I think this is one more area that I thought of sharing with you in case if you find that there is any unauthorized person in the classroom. I think the first thing that you have to do is report, and second thing is immediately announce for the postponement of the webinar or class, and immediately quit and exit that particular classroom. The reason is we do not have any idea what kinds of cyber security issues we could face, not just for the faculties or the content which is displayed, but also for the students. It's adequately important that students' personal and sensitive information is also well protected by the educational institutions and by the faculty when they are making use of digital classrooms. So this is one such arena that I thought of just focusing so as to ensure that you as an educator or an educational institution or as a school or a college or as a faculty or as a parent or a student are aware of. Next slide, please. Yeah. So there was this scenario that had just happened yesterday. I got this wonderful case where people started actually defaming and defaming and using derogatory language in their classrooms. So this is very, very important because a lot of students and a lot of people think that you can get away on making such comments because everything that you make is going to be anonymous. That's a thorough misconception, I would say, because the very fact that you're able to do something online, you can try to put up any of the what can I say? You can never delete your trails as you do in the physical classrooms. See, physical classroom, you can delete your trail because it's only the verbal acquisition that you make. But digitally, a lot of us think that you can just delete the post and it gets off. That's a thorough misconception. However you delete, you format, you do anything, still your post can be visible. So I would advise that not to make any defamatory or derogatory comments about anybody while you're making use of the digital classroom, whether it's the faculty or whether it's the students or whether it's the education institutions. I think everybody has to quickly realize that this is one such area that is not grossly to be missed in order to ensure that you do not land up in cyber legal risks and the legal suits thereof. Next slide, please. So this is one more area that I thought of sharing. This was a very interesting case that has come to me yesterday. And then I would say that yesterday was a watershed day because I've been receiving a lot of cases from the online educational domain, especially from different kinds of people, whether it's students or whether it's a faculty or whether it's an education institutions. I think there have been a lot of instances that have happened yesterday. So one such instance that I thought of sharing it with you is there's a lot of trolling happening on the social media with regard to the faculty and the education institution, and also some students who are trying to condemn any acts. So I got this case where a school was actually trying to host a digital classroom, and then there was some kinds of heated argument between the faculty and the students, and some students were mischievous, and then they tried to pose in a lot of unwarranted questions. And as a result, the teacher and the female students started condemning these people. And lo and behold, they started to take cyber revenge. After the class, they started trolling and started creating memes about these particular students and their faculty on social media. So for all of you that who think that trolling and memes are legally not having any kinds of effect on you, I think that's you're just living in a myth, and that is absolutely not true. So online trolling, we have a lot of provisions. We have criminal provisions, section 354D of the CRPC and IPC, specifically talking about online trolling. And we also have some sections in the Information Technology Act, which is the Indian cyber law, specifically under section 66, 66E, 66B, and 66C and D. So we'll also be touching on these areas so as to ensure that I give you certain amount of knowledge on what these actually mean in terms of law and legal provisions. Next slide, please. I think this is going to be very interesting. Now, there's a recent news that has come up in one of the newspapers in Kerala, where people started insulting teachers on social media, and immediately as a suo motu, the Cybercrime Police and the Kerala Youth Commission have started to charge cases on those particular students, and criminal charges and as well as compensation was actually initiated on these students for their breaches and improper behavior. I think these are just wake-up calls to just understand the legalities and the kinds of legal punishments that you could actually face in case of such trolls. Nevertheless, with everything over the globe turning to be digital, I think I'll also talk of some instances in Auckland and Berkeley where students' data, specifically during the online learning, was exposed to cybersecurity breach. So it becomes very important that we understand that it's not just the faculty, it's not just the content which is displayed by the faculty which is going to be exposed to cyber security breaches, but it's also the security and the personal data of the students that is likely to be exposed. I think we as faculties and education institutions need to pay attention to that aspect. Now, even California, the schools in California have not been spared, and they also started facing a lot of cybersecurity breaches, and specifically in terms of the privacy and the confidentiality of the students' information being leaked up in the public domain. Next slide, please. So I think these cyber attacks are trying to come up with some strengthening mechanisms towards cyber security. I think before this online learning came into existence, I think a lot of people across this education domain weren't even aware that there is something called cyber security which they need to be aware of. They only had a misconception that the cyber security is relating to IT and ITES domain and not applicable to schools and colleges. I think that's a thorough misconception. And specifically, I would also try to tell you that a lot of cyber criminals and hackers are trying to actually make higher education as their target for making cybersecurity breaches. So why? Because a lot of information is relating to higher education is made available in the public domain, more specifically with all the higher education students being made available on themselves on the social media. I think in the rush of going towards digital and online classrooms, I think a stepmotherly treatment is given to cybersecurity. And now schools have slowly started to wake up from this deep slumber so as to understand the importance and the value that cybersecurity adds in terms of preventing themselves from cyber breaches. Next slide, please. So I think there are lots of instances that are happening. Higher education in the Western countries was targeted. More specifically, the photographs, what do you say, personal information of the students were actually being targeted. I think a lot of things are actually happening in this domain. I think this is one area that increasingly cybersecurity breaches are happening, and then schools and colleges, especially in the higher education domain, need to pay attention to this particular area. Next slide, please. So when you look at this instance of Maricopa, I think 2.4 million students and employees, college and school employees' data was breached. I think these are just wake-up calls. Now, I've just seen in the recent times that 2.9 crore Indians' data is available on the dark web. So we'll also be touching on the dark web, but it's very interesting to see that all of this data is sold free without any kinds of monetary consideration. Next slide, please. In this scenario, accidentally, 1,100 students' data was shared by a Georgia Tech employee. So it becomes very interesting that it's not just this faculty and the education institutions that are being targeted, but also some employees, especially if you're making use of third-party digital classrooms, if you have vendors, if you have any third-party service providers to whom you actually have signed up contracts for the purpose of enabling you to digital classrooms, I think that's a wake-up call that you need to understand. Why? Because any breach from their end will also expose you towards legal liability. Now, this is one particular instance. The Washington State University has identified and has addressed that there was a cybersecurity incident which is relating to a stolen hard drive. I think these are just wake-up calls, because all these IT infrastructure, whether it's the login details, login credentials, or the hard drives, or the exam management system, or the attendance management system, I think everything needs to be securely protected. I've seen that a lot of times the IT admins in a respective education institution pay very little attention to changing the passwords. They think that the password is here and it's going to be here for a lifetime. So I would advocate that please, during this time of pandemic situation, it would be advisable to change your passwords from default passwords and keep on changing them to alphanumeric passwords to ensure that they're relatively safe. I think there is no guideline, or there is no magical phenomena of staying safe online, but I think these are just basic due diligence that I would recommend from a layman's perspective. So I think Australian National University has also started to go ahead and conduct online examinations despite the fact that there were cyber issues. I think this is one more area that a lot of education institutions are trying to now look at, especially during the period of pandemic, so as to ensure that their examinations are being conducted. I think it's very important that you stay alive to the fact that dedicated policies with regard to online examinations would have to be drafted, would have to be shared with all the schools, education institutions, and also with the faculty, as also the students and the parents. And the parents' consent becomes a very, very important aspect before you commence your digital classrooms. Now the question that comes before you is, well, you're telling I'm governed under cyber law. I'm a school, I'm a college, I'm an education institution, and I'm a faculty. Now, what has that got to do with cyber law? Well, that's a very, very interesting situation. So I just thought of just bringing in that kind of an awareness, how you're related to cyber law. So the moment you're making use of 7 things, I'll say if you're making use of these 7 things, I think you'll have to clearly understand that there is applicability of cyber law on you. You're using computers, computer systems, computer networks, computer resources, communication devices, as also data or information in the electronic format. I think you'll have to quickly realize that there is law that is coming across your necks. And this is nothing but the Indian cyber law, which is called as Information Technology Act, and the rules and regulations made thereunder. So once you're a school and you're making use of any of these 7 parameters, you get governed under this ambit of cyber law. More specifically, there's a very beautiful concept that the Information Technology Amended Act 2008 has brought into picture. I think there's something called the concept of intermediary, which has been introduced specifically under Section 21W, which says that, well, if you're a college, if you're an education institution, if you're anybody, if you're an individual or a company or an association of individuals, if you're collecting any kinds of electronic information or records, and you're providing any service with respect to that records, you get classified as an intermediary. So what does it mean to you? It means that any school, any college, any education institutions that is probably hosting electronic or digital classrooms becomes an intermediary. And not just that, apart from being an intermediary, you would also be considered as a network service provider. So the school and the college or the education institution that is providing online classes would be classified as a network service provider under the law. So you'll say, what? Okay, what if I'm an intermediary and what if I'm a network service provider? Well, the law says a couple of things. First thing, do your due diligence under the law. Second thing, do not partner yourself with anybody who's violating the law. Number 3, exercise due diligence and due care while you're discharging your obligations. So I will also talk about these due diligence aspects in a while, but just to ensure that this is the way in which the educational institutions are actually covered under the ambit of cyber laws. Next slide, please. So specifically, the law has come up with something called reasonable security practices and procedures. So you will say, what are these reasonable security practices and procedures? Simple. When it comes to having online classrooms, I think there are only 4 aspects that you need to typically look at. Number 1, have specific policies with regard to online classrooms. Number 2, ensure that the privacy of the students and the faculty is actually protected. So have adequate privacy policies. Number 3, have an adequate amount of terms and conditions so as to ensure what are the do's and don'ts with regard to the online classrooms. And the last one I would say is have a grievance mechanism. So these are the 4 parameters of reasonable security practices and procedures which you as an educational institution, as a school, as a faculty need to keep in mind. Now cybersecurity has actually gone ahead and received far more center stage attention with COVID-19. I think there are lots of legal policy regulatory issues that are cropping up with regard to cybersecurity in online education, especially with the lockdowns being extended. Next slide, please. So it's adequately important that you realize that, see, look at this instance of May's ransomware, where we all thought that ransom was only there in the extortion world, where people started kidnapping somebody and demanding a ransom. Well, that has seen a different paradigm altogether. And now with ransomware coming in, I think it's the new jewel of the crown. Why? Because everybody who's making use of a computer or a mobile phone could be a victim to ransomware. Recently, a company called Cognizant, who's India's, which is one of the largest Indian IT giants, has also been hit with something called May's ransomware. So simple scenario is that one fine day when you wake up, you get a message on your screen that you'll have to pay so and so amount, specifically in cryptocurrency called bitcoins, and only then you would be allowed to access that device. So most of us think that it's just a kind of a joke, but I'm sure that you'll have to appreciate and understand the value that it poses, because today mobiles and computers are being used for a variety of activities, whether it's personal, professional, social, educational, and the like. I think it's a lot of data that's going to be the new turmoil as time passes by. Next slide, please. I think one of the key essentials that you have to look into is there a cyber security in your learning management system? Is your LMS having cyber security? That's a great question that you as an educational institution, as well as a faculty, as well as a student or a parent need to increasingly look at. So that's the only reason I told you in the beginning that you'll have to go through the policies and the terms of your tool, of your learning management system, so as to ensure that your learning management system is cyber secured. Next slide, please. Yes, now this is a very, very important scenario, because your LMS should actually have some kinds of cyber security policies. You must have specific policies relating to breaches. You must have specific policies relating to what kinds of due diligence and reasonable security measures that the LMS has in place so as to ensure that your data is relatively secured. I think this is one more area that constantly needs attention. So GDPR, this is a new law that has emerged in the European Union. I think it's a new kinds of catalyst, which has totally changed the data protection landscape altogether. So for all the colleges and students who are actually international, and also to educational institutions who are hosting their classes for international students, specifically who are in the domain of European Union, I think now it's time that you understand that your LMS have to be GDPR compliant. So General Data Protection Regulation is the full form of GDPR. It allows you to maintain a privacy statement, specifically talking about the cyber security measures and the kinds of protection measures that you have adopted in protecting the personal data of these particular international students. Now, it's not just the course-related information that educational institution needs to look into. I think it's also the sensitive personal data or the personal information of the students that has to be primarily looked into. This is one more area that the school and the educational institutions and the parents need to increasingly look at. What kinds of protection measures are in place for protecting the sensitive personal data of the students? So yes, next slide, please. Video conferencing tools. I think when I look at the policies of one particular video conferencing tool, I'm shocked. Why? When I look at the terms and conditions, it clearly says that I will be sharing user data with Facebook without adequate disclosure of the same to the users. So without taking my permission, my data is shared across to Facebook by this particular video conferencing tool, and that becomes a very, very important aspect, because going forward, I think the privacy is now being made the fundamental right thanks to the Supreme Court judgment. I think that's a very, very important point that online education needs to focus on. Next slide, please. I think there are a lot of things that are coming up with the specific use of artificial intelligence. I think that's going to be completely painting the canvas red. Why? Because now with artificial intelligence coming in online education, this is going to pose a lot of cyber legal, ethical, policy, regulatory issues. So specifically, a lot of schools are trying to consider having facial recognition as one of the forms for checking up attendance. I think the face is the new passport of the world. I think when you're doing that, I think it's adequately important you stay secured before adopting such kinds of technology and technology measures. Next slide, please. So darknet is something that is completely ignored. Now, with the adoption of digital technology, I think a lot of netizens are now slowly trying to also look into the areas of darknet, which is completely called the dark side of the internet, which is not available in the public domain. It can be accessed only by a specific kinds of browsers like the Tor browser, and specifically a lot of legitimate and illegitimate activities are happening over the darknet, specifically with regard to online education. I think there's a lot of important center stage attention that darknet is raising, because everybody in the darknet is trying to do some of the other kinds of criminal activity which is totally undetected. Next slide, please. I think when you're uploading photographs or videos from your mobile phone, you have to think twice. Why? Because when I do analyze a particular piece of photograph which is uploaded from the mobile, I can clearly be able to identify your latitudes and longitudes and the exact geographical locations. So this is very, very important and critical, so as to ensure that you protect your geographical location, you protect your identity, you protect your location, specifically in order to ensure that you're not being hit by a cyber attack. WhatsApp is turned out to be the de facto mode in India. I think there is nobody here without a WhatsApp account. I think when you look at WhatsApp, I'm very clear on one thing. When I'm sharing out audio, video, image, or text using WhatsApp, I think all this information is now information in the public domain. When I look at the terms and conditions of WhatsApp, I clearly know that, yes, it's end-to-end encrypted, no doubt about it. But however, these kinds of information that I'm sharing, audio, video, image, or text, becomes information in public domain. Once it becomes information in public domain, I cannot seek any legal remedy thereof. I think this has to be increasingly looked at before you make use of WhatsApp or sharing this data. Next slide, please.
So Sushant sir, my question here is that when we know that sharing data on WhatsApp, it's not safe, sharing pictures on Facebook, it's not safe, and then we have got darknet, how can we save ourselves from this?
I would say that in order to save yourself, I will say that do not post photographs. And even if you're posting photographs, do not ensure that these are high quality selfies that are enabling your face completely, because the moment you're doing that, you're inviting a lot of trouble, because I have received a lot of cases wherein people have put up high quality selfies as display pictures or profile pictures on WhatsApp or on Facebook, and immediately within few minutes they'll end up getting into cyber crimes, which wherein a lot of photographs are misused on various pornographic domains, and then a lot of misuse is also happening in terms of selling up this particular piece of photograph to people for consideration. I think this is one more area which none of us are really aware, because when we look at the terms of Facebook or else WhatsApp, I think clearly it completely evaporates the concept of privacy here. So the moment we're using it, I think clearly we have no right to question about the privacy and the protection measures whatsoever. So I would advocate that we do not share out high quality selfies.
All right. Second is it equally dangerous to upload our DPs on our profiles, being that Facebook, LinkedIn, or WhatsApp?
Absolutely, it's going to be dangerous, because, like I said, any information by way of audio, video, image, or text, the moment you're uploading it on WhatsApp, including your display picture or the profile picture on Facebook, I think we are simply agreeing to the fact that it is going to be information in public domain. Once it is information in public domain, any misuse happens, we cannot sue Facebook or WhatsApp, and we cannot go and seek a legal remedy for such breach or criminal activities. I think we'll also have to clearly understand that we are going to be potential victims, and we will have no option to fight whatsoever. It's just like the thief going for a robbery and then getting himself attacked with a dangerous object, and there's a lot of hue and cry, but he cannot share that in the public domain. With something like that, I would say.
Another question is that, like, we click our selfies and click our kids' pictures as well, and we save it on Google Drive or we save it on cloud. Is saving our pictures on cloud equally dangerous as it is to upload on WhatsApp and Facebook?
Increasingly, yes, but I would say that when you're doing that specifically, I would ask you to sanitize your pictures, because just like you're having hand sanitizers, there are also something called photo sanitizers. So what happens is they delete your metadata. So every photograph has a metadata attached to it, with which you can do a lot of cyber criminal activities. But however, if you're having basically uploading these things on your Google Drives and have reasonably secured passwords, I think there's nothing much to actually think forward. But that also is not 100% going to be of in any kinds of immunity to cyber risks. I think the moment we are having some kinds of protection measures, that would adequately secure ourselves, but cannot 100% or completely secure ourselves in the digital environment.
All right. So what you're trying to say is that even if we click our pictures, we don't upload it on cloud or anywhere on internet, because once it goes on internet, it's not our personal data, it becomes a public data.
Absolutely. So that's the new kinds of phenomena, because data is now being the increasingly important aspect that a lot of companies are looking into, and especially if it is something relating to sensitive and personal data.
All right. I have got another question, that when these crimes are happening at darknet, is there a pattern you have seen that maybe pictures which are being uploaded frequently or are being liked frequently are the pictures which are being attacked or primarily being used, or it is just random that they pick up anybody's picture despite how frequent they are on social media, or how frequent they are uploading, or how frequent activities are happening on that account?
There are two kinds of statements that I would like to make in this regard. The first statement is, yes, one thing is looking at your regular photographs being uploaded, regular activities that are happening. I think that you could be increasingly put to cyber attacks. That is no doubt about it. But nevertheless, there could also be certain kinds of activities which they could make use of some profiles which are not being regularly updated, because this is one such area that's actually a boon to them rather than bane. Because what really happens is, since a lot of since the account is not actively uploading recent data, or there are not enough amount of recent transactions that are happening on, inactive profiles. I think inactive profiles are also going to play increasingly an important role in terms of cyber crimes. I think both have their pluses and minuses. I think relatively, if both have their own advantages and disadvantages, both can be put to cyber crimes. There is no doubt about it. But only thing, my two bits of advice is, if you're having an account on social media, be active. See, the moment you're active, at least do some kinds of activities on it. Don't try to just create it. And then I see that some of them are bored. They're actually not fancied, so they just stay up for some time away from those particular networking sites. So I would say that is going to be increasingly more dangerous than the people who are regularly in it, because regular people, at least they are at least vigilant on what's happening. But the people who rarely browse are the people who are going to be likely to be hit more, in the sense that since there are not active transactions happening, I think before even knowing and understanding that you're being hit, you're already being hit. So you don't even get the time, you
All
don't
right.
even have the knowledge that you're being hit.
All right. Another question is that what if somebody notices these crimes happening, or something, misuse of picture, misuse of DP happening, what we can do at that point in time, and where should we go to report? Because whosoever has committed the crime, his face or his identity is not visible to us. We may not even know that from which domain they are uploading or doing all of that shitty stuff. So in that case, first question is that what should we do? What should be our first step? And second, how should we ensure that it doesn't happen, or the picture gets removed or deleted? And third, who should we report this to ensure it doesn't happen again?
Okay, fundamentally, I would say that in case you come across any such cyber crime, I think primarily first you'll have to make a report. You can make a report abuse on the social media itself. That could be the first step that I would say. The second step is make a screenshot of the same, and then you can lodge a complaint with the cyber crime police. So you have something called 𝗖𝐵rcrime.gov.in. It's a portal for registering a cyber crime. So increasingly, that what you'll have to do is take screenshots of those images to ensure that you have adequate amount of evidence that have been used. And third, if you're typically trying to make use of these kinds of things in any kinds of forums or any kinds of groups, that you find that in that group or in that community that the crime has taken place, you can also report it to the admins and the group members of that particular group or community. I think these should be the three primary steps that you need to look at in case you find something fishy, or you find that there's a cyber crime that is actually taking place. Most importantly, what happens is you don't even realize till the time something really drastic happens that you're being hit. So the beauty is that only after you're hit, you will be able to understand and figure out that you've been hit. See, unlike the physical world, where it is exactly on the contra, but here the most important aspect is identity. And more specifically, that when you look at the terms and conditions of these Facebook or WhatsApp, they're very clearly stating that they are Californian entities, they're governed by Californian laws, and there are any kinds of legal arrangements or treaties between our Indian police and those organizations. So typically, on an average, I think it will take a lot of time in case they go and approach them for seeking the appropriate data. I think the first step you can do is lodge a complaint towards them, so that you can at least report them, and then ensure that you have done your due diligence and putting the onus of responsibility on the enforcement agencies.
All right. So in past, have you seen incidents where the complaint was lodged? Were there any actions taken on those complaints, or it was just that complaint was lodged and nobody cared to get back and take actions on those complaints?
This is a glitch question, shall I say, because there have been some, typically by and large, the center stage attention would be drawn only in terms of corporate things, because I deal with corporate companies to a large extent. We keep looking at some kinds of corporate cyber crimes that have been taking place. For example, we had a recent instance before the lockdown where one of the employees, he was supposed to do a task, and his team leader typically assigned him that task, but he was not paying any attention. In the moment of frustration, the team leader has given an email and an SMS to the respective employee, abusing him, about regarding with abusive language and derogatory comments. I think the employee did not do anything. He went to the police station, showed the screenshots, and registered an FIR. But in those kinds of scenarios, I think it's going to be a wake-up call. I think in some actions are likely to be emerged in those scenarios. But unfortunately, the prosecution and the what do you say? Protect targeting a cyber criminal is not largely seen, though the act has been passed 20 years back. We can see only a handful of convictions. We have not even entered into a triple-digit conviction rate because the Indian cyber law has been made a paper tiger. Earlier, there was any crime that you commit, specifically under the Information Technology Act, was a non-bailable offense, which is meaning that bail could not be given. But now, with the recent amendment in 2008, they've completely withheld the punishment mechanism and made everything as a bailable offense. I think this withheld down of punishment is also being one of the increasing areas that criminals are looking at because they feel that they can just get away with, and then nothing is going to really affect them in any manner. I think this is one area that is not being addressed effectively, either with the enforcement agencies or with the judicial agencies, because lack of awareness and then a lot of sensitization and capacity building is also required in this domain. Unfortunately, it's still we've though a lot of institutions are doing the same, but still there's a gap between the technology and the law. It's just like the gap between the cup and the lid. I think a lot of work needs to happen in this domain. Only then I think one form of what do you say fear can come into the mind of people. And even this, I'll tell you, when you look at GDPR, I was talking to you a couple of minutes ago on GDPR. I was wonderstruck when even a small college startup came to me saying that, we want to be GDPR compliant. Why? Because the punishment mechanism in GDPR is very high. It says 4% of global turnover or 4 crores, whichever is higher, in case you're not compliant. But the same thing is there in India in the Information Technology Act, more specifically under IT Rules 2011, which has not been spoken any which is not having any value today. Roughly, if I check 100 websites or 100 applications and see how secured are they to the cyber law, I think 99% people are not secured. 1.5% are aware, the other 0.5% are doing something more. But unfortunately, ignorance of law is no excuse.
Right, true, absolutely. Another point is that while we are being socially active on the social domains online, either through our laptops or through our mobiles, does it mean that we have got equal threat on the transactions which we make, the online financial transactions which we make? So I am talking about the financial transaction through bank, online net banking, and the other bit is through Paytm or other third-party gateways if we are using. So does it mean that our data which we save, our credit card details which we save, we are at risk here as well?
Definitely, they're going to be at risk because, like I told you, we use our mobiles and computers for a large variety of purposes. That includes personal, professional, social, and official. So, in that being so, there are lots of websites that we may come across. We may click on so many links. We may do lots of activities. But nevertheless, we do not have any idea if there is a malware or a spyware that is working in the background, and that is actually trying to capture all of these. Because most of the times, as I see, there are these popular websites or applications that open up a lot of legal Pandora's box, because malware and spyware is automatically getting installed at the background, which none of us are aware. And unfortunately, the moment we come to know about it, the damage is done. So we come to know about it only once we are hit. I would say in public domains, especially when you are using public networks, highly refrain from using public Wi-Fi's, and then what do you say, going ahead and using Wi-Fi in public places, so as to ensure that you're adequately protected. Because once we have the concept of free Wi-Fi coming in, I think that's going to pose a lot of legal challenges, specifically that your mobiles and the computers could be the next target. And ransomware, like I said, it's not sparing anybody. You're trying to download any particular application. So same thing is happening specifically in the mobile and the mobile ecosystem, because we are by and large installing lots of newer kinds of applications without realizing the requirement for those things. For example, when you look at Truecaller, see, I was wondered a couple of days back when one of my clients had downloaded Truecaller, and he was a CFO in a company. and the OTP was coming, and then I was there present because I was in a particular meeting, and then he said, yes, look, the OTP is come. And he showed me the OTP. I was surprised that the OTP has got reflected through Truecaller, which is meaning what? That the application is reading all my one-time passwords and my confidential information, which could be then misused, or which could be then being made as a potential target for committing any kinds of offenses. I think people need to really understand the legalities before using such applications. Truecaller, WhatsApp, and FaceApp. FaceApp also is one such area that a lot of times people started using it, even including celebrities. So when they endorsed it, I think the whole world becomes addicted to it, where you try to make use of artificial technology, artificial intelligence, to swap your young look towards the older look. I think this, without realizing the fact that the whole information relating to your data, relating to your facial recognition has gone viral, and then that's like almost sharing out your what do you say, bank key or locker key physically with somebody else. It's as equally as dangerous as that. And more specifically, once facial recognition is now going to be the new world order, I think that's going to bring in a lot of potential legal issues, specifically privacy issues, because today everything is made available for sale on the darknet, including the facial recognition patterns of a lot of people, which is very unique to that particular individual. I think all of us are leaving out digital trails and evidence while we are making up, while we're doing our transactions over the computer or the mobile. Just by analyzing that, I can either catch a criminal, or rather I can also commit a crime. So that is the kinds of legalities that we need to be aware of.
It sounds so scary. It seems as if it is a bigger pandemic than coronavirus. My another question to you is that while we are doing transactions online, my question is that if we upload malwares like Kaspersky or other protective things, do you think at that point in time we can feel safe, or maybe 100% safe, that now our data is private to us, it's not public, and no other hacker or any other application would be able to access the data?
I think I think that is a very uncharted terrain, because staying 100% secured in the cyber and digital environment is only a myth. But like I said, you can be reasonably secured if you're making use of these kinds of antivirus programs. And more significantly, I would say, just not having antivirus programs are going to save you, but keep on updating them, because the moment you're not updating them, you're still stuck to the older versions. I think you're still inviting a lot of trouble, because it's just something called a zero-day attack, where the earlier version may have had certain vulnerabilities. If you don't patch them up, you're still prone to those vulnerabilities. So I would recommend that it's not enough if you have them, but you need to also update them equally.
All right. So what you want to say that that these malwares actually provides a lot of protection to our private data, to our pictures, to our financial transaction or financial card details. So it does provide a lot of protection if we, provided we keep updating these malwares and softwares.
No, I'm talking about. I'm not talking about malwares. I'm talking about antivirus programs. See, now the moment you're updating and using antivirus programs, I think that will be relatively secured, in order to ensure that your data is not relatively exposed to cyber criminals. But most important aspect that I would like to tell you here is, please make sure that you're using the original version. Here also, do not go ahead and then start using pirated versions, because computer privacy is itself a cybercrime. So that means I'm not talking to a gentleman, but I'm talking to a cyber criminal. So that is one area that people really need to understand, because if you think of certain small kinds of monies that are going to be there as part of this, you'd be exposing a larger domain, which would be more than this particular cost. Maybe it's 20 times, 100 times, or even 1,000 times more than this value that you would be exposing. So I think this is one area that people need to be increasingly looking at, because the other day when I was talking in a state conference, I was really shocked that it was a state government conference where 9 governments participated. I was one of the speakers, and I was shocked to see when they were uploading the PPT that the Windows version was not a genuine one. So it gave a pop-up that please use genuine version of Windows. So this is very unfortunate that we're still using the pirated versions.
Right. All this comes, Of course, the increased crime rate is increasing because of the ignorance as well.
So right to privacy, like I said, it's going to bring in, see, this is a wonderful scenario, though all of us may think that it's going to be really, what do you say, a hilarious joke, but this is a ground reality that we need to be aware. Right to privacy is now being made the fundamental right of every citizen of the country, thanks to the Supreme Court judgment. Next slide, please. I think this is something that I clearly thought of bringing in this kinds of webinars. We need to really be aware what is called sensitive information, what is called personal data. So there is something that the law has defined called sensitive personal data or information. So it is passwords, whether they're auto-generated passwords or created passwords, financial information, including your bank account details, credit card numbers, debit card numbers, OTPs, ATM pins, and the like, biometrics, sexual orientation relating to specifically your gender related information, health and medical records, and any information that is used for under a lawful contract. So these are some things that you quickly have to realize that they are sensitive and personal data as far as the law is concerned. Next slide, please. Now, there's an exception. If you're making any kinds of disclosures under RTI, Right to Information Act, that is exempt to be called as sensitive personal data or information. Next slide, please. Now, more specifically, what is personal information? Any information with which I can identify an individual. So that means his name, his email ID, his phone number, his passport number, Aadhaar number, driving license number, blood group, or identity card, or the IP address, or the device ID, anything specifically that is able to identify an individual calls to be a personal information as far as the law is concerned. Next slide, please. So the law says, like I said, three things: comply, exercise due diligence, and do not partner. So I would also talk about the civil and criminal exposures. For those of you who are not related to the legal front, I will put it in a very simple and layman's perspective. Civil is something to deal with money and compensation, damages by way of compensation, and criminal always means imprisonment and penalties. Next slide, please. So the moment you're an intermediary and you're a network service provider and you're trying to give up and collect any of these sensitive personal information or personal data, I think you need to be alive to the fact that you'll have to do your due diligence. And like I said, due diligence will be having 4 parameters: privacy policy, terms and conditions, have a specific user data protection agreement, and lastly, have a grievance mechanism. So if you don't have any of these 4, you could be exposed to 2 kinds of liabilities: civil liability and criminal liability. Civil could be by way of compensation of up to 5 crore rupees per contravention. So there are 4 contraventions that you make. There are 20 crores is what potentially you could be sued for. And likewise, when you look at criminal liabilities, it would range from 3 years to life imprisonment and a fine ranging from 1 lakh rupees to 10 lakh rupees. I think these are the landscapes of legal liabilities that one needs to understand before he actually complies with the law. Next slide, please. You also have this particular section that is going to talk about non-compliance and to any of the regulations made there under. 25,000 rupees is what you can be potentially actually asked to pay as compensation. Next slide, please. So who's going to be liable? So this is a very important domain that I thought of just sharing it with you. So a lot of us think it is only the school and the college that is going to be liable. No, it's not just the school and college alone. The school and college, being a legal person, the top management of the school and college or the educational institution, the middle management of the school and college, and the respective faculty who was actually taking that session, as also the students, parents, and the guardians who actually consented on behalf of the student. I think all of these people would be liable in case they do not comply. So it's very important that you have an understanding of how this has to be looked into and the seriousness. And one more important area that I thought of sharing with you is there are lots of intellectual property issues that are likely to arise in this online learning. Why? Because so much so that everything that is being made as your presentation is copied from the internet. Why? Because Control C, Control V, Control A are the favorite 3 keys of any computer user. So likewise, they're also going to expose you to civil and criminal liabilities, more specifically in the light of intellectual property violations. So intellectual property in online learning is relating to trademarks and copyrights. Copyrights is going to be one of the key areas that needs to be addressed. Why? because there is something called fair use. So I would like to talk of this because we recently handled one kinds of copyright infringement in the online educational domain. So I'll tell you what happened in this case. So a faculty was actually trying to address their students in a digital classroom. A presentation was made, and as a result, there was one particular program which was made available on the internet, and it was for a cost. So unless you pay the cost, you could not enroll yourself. And one of the teachers, she enrolled into the program. She took screenshots of those information and content in the program. She then used it for the same in her presentation while she wanted to explain about the simplicity of the subject before the students. So in this kind of a scenario, she has taken an exception called fair use. So you will be exempt if you violate copyright in couple of scenarios. One, in case you don't have any monetary intention, you don't want to monetize it. Two, when you're using it for a limited gathering. Three, when you're ensuring that it is only for a particular purpose, like bringing in awareness or for education purpose. Four, you're not trying to use the complete work as such. You're using only a part of the work. But however, in this kind of a scenario, there was an interesting case which was being lodged because the Copyright Act has now been amended in 2012, bringing about a lot of huge amounts of liabilities, both from a compensation perspective as well as from the imprisonment perspective on the copyright infringer. So that being so, I think when you look at the Copyright Act, specifically under Section 63B, one has to quickly realize that you could also be part of this particular section. So though the teacher argued that is only limited a portion of work, unlimited audience, and it's only for the educative purpose, still the fair use could not be exercised. Why? Because this course was only being made available for people who've paid and entered the course. So therefore, by showcasing the content from such course is trying to have a negative and a monetary loss on with regard to the course, because not many people would actually try to enroll onto the program. Why? Because the information is already available to them without being enrolled into that program, without making any payment. So this is one such area that all faculties really need to keep in mind, that especially when you're making use of content in your slides and making use of the same in the digital classrooms. I think more specifically, a screenshot also could be legal evidence, could be used against you. So this is one more area that I thought of sharing.
I have a question here. How about that somebody is taking online classes with schools, which means that the pictures of the kids is visible on the screen to the third party. However, the third party has taken the permission to record those educational sessions. So what I'm trying to say that third party is delivering session on the Zoom platform of school, and the school, of course, the kids' faces and their names are appearing on the screen. Now the third party uses that screenshot, but then this has all happened after taking their permission, that I can use this whole education thing, which of course is delivered by third party, and also can use the pictures of the kids just to mention that, see, this is the session which we have taken. Is there any breach here, you see?
Definitely, it's going to pose in a lot of legal questions. So I will tell that to you as we can discuss now. The first thing is that, see, when I'm making use of a third party, specifically as a school or an education institution, I will tell you different perspectives. The first perspective that I would like to talk of is from the educational or the school perspective. So, okay, when I make use of a third party for delivering sessions to all my students, I intrinsically am exposing not just my confidential and sensitive data, but also my sensitive data of my students. So increasingly, I need to ensure that I have proper consent from the students, specifically from the parents of the students about this. There has to be a specific agreement and a policy talking about the data protection, the purpose, the way in which it is captured, the reason, and to whom all is it shared, why is it shared, what kinds of due diligence and security mechanisms they have to prevent it in case I want to report who is to be liable. So I think these are some areas that the school has to look into, failing which they can be exposed to legal liability. Now, talking from the third-party service provider's perspective. Now, if I'm a third-party service provider, I intend to do sessions for schools. I intend to record them. I intend to use them for my own purposes. Well, it's not just enough if I sign up documents with the school. I also need to ensure that specific documents and consent that has been signed with the respective students individually so as to ensure that their consent, that is, I don't say the students' consent, the parents' consent, because agreements with minors is per se unenforceable under law. So specifically, the parents or the guardians of the respective children or the students have to be captured very specifically in the light of what kinds of data has been shared, why is it shared, why is it recorded, to whom all is it shared, what security mechanisms I have in place in case I want to report who is the grievance officer. Only if I have all of these, I could be safe from my legal liability. If I don't have any of this, I think I could be exposed to large number of legal liabilities. So this is one more area. Now, third, looking at the parents or the students' perspective. Now, when you look at the students' perspective, when I know that I've been recorded, my data has been collected, I must ensure that I have in place a proper mechanism to ensure that I am actually put up in a decent way. For example, when I'm taking video, I must ensure that I'm sitting in the right posture. I'm exposed to legal liabilities. And more specifically, I need to give up my consent with regard to with the school as well as to the respective third party provider only if that consent is given by me. I think you'll have to quickly understand that anything can happen. If you don't give up consent specifically for this purpose, as a faculty, as a parent, you still have not done your due diligence. So you would be required to read those policies and then specifically give consent. So that is your due diligence as a parent. So I would address this in three phases, like I said, for the education institution, for the parent, and for the respective third party. And if there are any faculty being used, see, let's say that there is actually a faculty being also exposed in this area. The faculty belongs to the school who would be acting as a coordinator. I think specifically the same has to even apply to the faculty in case of collecting or trying to collect the details relating to the respective faculty, who's acting as a catalyst between the third party tool and the students. So that
All
is the
right.
kinds of exposure.
I have got another question here. So, how about if we are third party and we get connected with schools? Don't we assume that because kids are schools' clients, it's school's responsibility to ensure? Or if I am getting my kid admission in the school, then I am actually trusting them. Or I, even if policy is there or not, but then I am trusting my kids' information, my kids' uh, well-being while he's going to the school. So now if the third party is actually taking classes on the Zoom sessions created by the schools, don't we assume that the agreement is between the third party and the school? And if that has to go beyond, then it is school's responsibility to ensure that they have got the same thing done between them and their clients, and that is the school students of that school. So in that case, why the third party would be directly being infringement of any breach of any of the policy? Why, if something get exposed despite third party has taken consent from the school, still third party would be liable?
Absolutely, the intentions are very noble, and then you're just trying to push up numbers and then say that the kids would be featured in the list. Well, that's a very good thing. But like I said, when you look at the definition of intermediary under Section 21W, I think even a third party gets classified as an intermediary. So the moment they're collecting, processing, storing any of the sensitive personal information of the students, and they're providing a respective service to that particular student, I think clearly it's nothing to do with the school. The school has to ensure the privacy of the students, that is between the school and the student. But in this kind of a scenario, it's clearly going to be the third party and the students, because it's going to be ultimately the third party delivering the session to the students and not to the school directly. So once they're delivering the session directly to the students, they're actually exposed to the students' sensitive information and data. They have to protect themselves. No matter whether the school has protection or not, it's not of great concern to the third party, but third parties have to ensure that they have documented due diligence with the students, because their information is being made available to them directly, and then it's them who are hosting it directly to the students, and then the school is only acting as a facilitator in this regard. So there are
All
a
right.
couple of
Thank
things
you.
that I would like to share here. This is one important section that I thought of bringing it before you, because it is going to bring in a lot of legalities to online education. See, this is section number 43 under Information Technology Act, which is called the civil provision. So I was just discussing a while ago that civil provisions are only going to talk about monetary and damages and things like that. So what I want to increasingly tell you is, if you're a person without the permission of you, if you do a variety of these activities, I'll try to quickly wrap it up. If you're accessing, securing access, downloading, copying, extracting data, introducing a computer contaminant, damaging a system, disrupting a network, causing denial of access, providing legal assistance, and then also doing a variety of activities. See, what happens in this scenario, I'll tell you. Suppose you're making use of a third party system, and the third party system you're not the owner, or you're not having any control of. If you're able to introduce a computer contaminant, so let's say that you've sent the information of today's meeting to all your students, and that meeting link unfortunately had virus in it, for example. uh, and then you share that across to the students, and then as a result the student also shares it to their peer group. So in this kind of a scenario, everybody in the chain, in case the virus is going to disrupt or damage the computer, will be legally held responsible. Why? Because if you're done that without the permission of the owner, you have yourself will be presumed to be the creator of the virus. So exercise your due diligence while you're sharing out documents. That's why you do an antivirus scan before you share any kinds of attachments with anybody, including meeting links. Recently, I had also come across that particular scenario wherein there was an automated program which was made use by an education institution to share the meeting links with all the students. Unfortunately, there was a mass mailing that was done, and as a result, unknown parties also happened to get information to this meeting, and a lot of chaos happened in this case. So I would more specifically request you that if you're a teacher or a faculty or an education institution, specifically who's sharing out links to their students regarding the online classes, in the subject of the email, please do add some unique element that will be able to identify the respective faculty's class, so that the students do not click out on unsolicited links, because there could be a lot of unsolicited links that could emerge with the various platforms being coming in. I think as a legal due diligence from a school or a faculty's purpose, I think you'll have to ensure that something unique is done which specifically identifies you with your students or with your faculty. I think this is one key tip that I thought of bringing forward as time passes by, because it's going to pose in a lot of cyber legal challenges.
All right. I have a question for the website. So if there is a website which is an LMS website which is created for kids to log in, to take courses, and then of course pay for the courses and move out once they are done with the course. For these kind of websites is SSL certificate. So when I am logging into any website, having HTTPS colon is enough for me, because I consider that is a website which is secured by SSL certificate. But then, is this only sufficient to ensure that when I'm logging in, when I'm punching in my details of cards and purchasing something online, I am safe and my data is safe?
I think relatively, yes, you could use that as a parameter. But however, I would say please also look at the domain name properly, because what is happening is SSL certificates are going to be going good, but however, the cyber criminals are now being opportunistic. They're trying to make use of every opportunity and vulnerability that is existing on the internet. I think more specifically, if you're able to look at the domain also properly. For example, let's say that there is an ABC bank that you're actually making use of for this transaction. So when you're directed to the secured page, HTTPS colon slash, and then you have abcbank.com. Please also pay attention to the domain name. When you see abc.com, bank.com, sometimes it may happen that the A or the C may have some unique element, some dash or some symbol that is not there otherwise. So it is important that you also look at that course, to avoid any kinds of phishing attacks. So phishing is also one kinds of cyber crimes that is happening in the online education industry that also will be discussing. Phishing is nothing but creating a fake login page as if it is resembling the original. So you cannot really identify as a common man which is original and which is forged. But unfortunately, when you do a deeper observation, you will be able to quickly realize that there is something that is not right. So if you're able to basically figure out that, I think that is going to be one of the areas that you could actually use to prevent yourself from phishing attacks. Because phishing attacks have become the new order of the day, more specifically in the online domain, specifically with regard to these applications like Zoom, Google Meet, and the like. So therefore, it becomes relatively important that you also pay attention to the domains of these, so as to ensure that you're clicking and entering information in the right portals. So this is one more area that I thought of sharing it with you. Next slide, please. So this is what I thought of just informing you, that in case you're making use of somebody else's laptop or a mobile phone which is specifically stolen, not with proper authorization, you could not just be accused for stealing that particular device and using a stolen computer resource, but you would also be accused of the data theft, because there's a lot of data being present on that device. So you'll also be accused for stealing and data theft with respect to that stolen device. So next slide, please. Three important sections that I thought of just highlighting is 66C, D, and E. So C is nothing but identity theft. So identity theft is one of the common things that is ever happening on the internet, and it's become the de facto mode even in the online education. Why? Because everything, if I'm logging in from someone else's by someone else's name, then I'm automatically taking the identity of that particular person. So therefore, which is very unique. So I think a lot of cyber crimes, especially relating to this social media and these video conferencing tools, are by and large identity thefts. Why? I make use of someone else's name, I steal the identity, I make use of someone else's identity to log in. So when I'm doing so, I'm taking identity belong to someone else, and I'm doing an identity theft. So when I'm doing that, I could be charged under section 66C. And more specifically, there could be imprisonment up to 3 years. Now, D, cheating by impersonation. The moment I make use of someone else's profile or someone else's name, and I commit a certain acts, so it will be as if the act would be from someone who was actually whose name is being used, but not from you who was actually used the name to commit the crime. So basically, what I would say is, if you're using someone else's name and then pretending to be someone else, for example, this happens a lot on chat rooms, specifically in the social media. People start getting into chat rooms, they start talking. A lot of cyber stalking and cyber bullying is happening through these kinds of cheating by impersonation. Why? They take someone else's identity, they make use of the same, and then do that. Recently, when you look at the boys' locker case that has completely shaken the entire cyber world, I think one quickly realizes that there's a case of identity theft, as well as the question of cheating by impersonation that has actually transpired in this case. So it's very important that you actually try to understand what is the exact identity of the person. If you're having any kinds of doubts, though the intentions are noble, I think you'll have to quickly think twice before you actually give up any details. So this is one more interesting area that everybody, whether it's a school, education institution, a student, a parent, or a faculty, needs to look at. Even the faculty profile also may be used to pass some false commands or instructions to the students. So that also is one potential possibility, more specifically in the scope of online education, that could actually trigger a lot of legal and cyber crime and cyber security related issues. Next slide, please. Personal privacy is going to be holding very, very high intrinsic value, because with video classrooms and video sessions coming in, like I said, it's going to be important that you stipulate specific guidelines with regard to protecting the privacy, individual privacy of the respective student or the respective faculty. So because failing which, I think they could be exposed to a variety of cyber crimes like cyber pornography, morphing, identity theft, cheating by impersonation, and the like. So therefore, this is one more area that intrinsically people have to really understand, protecting personal privacy. Next slide, please. So ransomware, as I told, is going to be the new feather in the cap, because it's going to be ruling everybody, and more specifically in the domain of clicking on different links, downloading different applications on your mobile phones or laptops that are not relatively safe. So this could expose you and your device data in the hands of cyber criminals who would be using that for a variety of activities, and who would be demanding ransom specifically in terms of bitcoins or cryptocurrency, failing which they would completely take away the control of the device, and then you would not be able to do anything further. So this is one more area that I would increasingly want people to understand. Just previous slide, please. Next slide, please. A lot of IoT devices that we are making use of, whether it's the Alexas or whether it's the Google Homes or whether it's the Siris of the world, we'll have to quickly realize that these bringing a lot of privacy related issues, especially when you're talking about some sensitive conversations. I had actually come across this case that I thought of sharing with you, that in one session where the faculty was actually trying to deliver some session, and once the session is completed, there was also a device which was there. She was typically talking about the science subject relating to human body, and specifically in the domain of reproduction. So it so happened that this Amazon Alexa, which was just placed close to this faculty's position, it recorded the whole thing, and then it interpreted it, and as a result, it also made an online order with regard to certain items which are very delicate in nature. So all this thanks to the privacy issues that have been happening. And when you look at any of your mobile phones, stay alive to the fact that everything has microphone in it, and it's going to record every transaction. So my request to all of you is, when you're discussing sensitive matters, do not share out, stay away from these devices, stay even away from your mobile phones. Why? Because you do that, you can also look at doing a demo yourself. For example, just look at your mobile phone, keep it at a certain distance, talk about some aspects. For example, a particular movie or a particular hero or a particular topic. And a few minutes later, when you open up your browser, you will find every post relating to that particular conversation has actually cropped up on the screen. How? Because of this kinds of scenarios that are happening. Now, the cyber crimes that are happening generally in online education are unauthorized access, identity thefts, cheating by impersonation, phishing, computer contaminants, ransomware, and the like. So there are lots of these issues that are commonly happening around in terms of online education. So unauthorized access could also be amounting to hacking. Zoom bombing is one such instance. I was in an international webinar where I was attending, and unfortunately, within a few minutes on starting of the webinar, there was an entry by some foreign ailments, and immediately the host is called off the session. I think these are just wake-up calls. And you need to be quickly realizing that this could be potentially exposing not just you, but your attendees' data also to legal risks, basically. Next slide, please.
So when you just discussed about that telephone, that mobile example, does it mean that even despite the microphone is off, even despite the camera is off, somebody or the device is still capturing what you're saying?
Yes, obviously you can make an experiment yourself when you just try to do that. See, after this webinar, you just keep your mobile phone near you, and then just keep talking something about a particular topic. Once you finish talking about it, after a few minutes, just open up your mobile phone, start opening the browsers, maybe Firefox, maybe Safari, maybe Chrome, maybe the Samsung browser, maybe anything. Just open up, and you will start slowly receiving the post relating to that particular topic. So the content will be very specifically addressing that. If you're talking about a movie, you'll get every post relating to that movie. So it's that the whole concept of privacy is totally evaporated. And then we can see that in bits and sperms, the privacy being totally moving out and slowly watering down on the privacy aspect. This is one more area that is not much spoken of anywhere, but I can tell you that this will happen very specifically with any mobile phone, any tablet, or any IoT devices, including your smartwatch or things like that. And all I want to make you understand is anything that you do digital is actually called a digital is called an electronic record as far as our act is concerned. So your mobile transactions, your SMS, your WhatsApps, your social medias, anything is an electronic evidence, and it can be used against you. So think twice before you do any of these, because the moment that this comes into the public domain, I think a case can be lodged for your own posts that you have made, for your own conversations that you have made against your own self. So that could be incriminating you as a cyber criminal. So I would ensure you that when you're making use of the smart gadgets, think twice.
All right. So when we are attending or working on laptops, of course, we have got camera right in front of us. Does it mean that despite that is off, our face or our identity is still being captured, like the voice is being captured despite the microphone is off?
Not specifically. I don't really think that could be possible. But however, the security settings in the camera are most likely to be vulnerable, because I've seen a number of cases wherein there are lots of tools that could be used in case your the camera settings are not adequately protected. You could also expose your camera's vulnerability to third-party attackers, wherein they could switch on the camera and then record the video without your consent or knowledge. So this is one more area that I would like to tell you. So ensure that you have relatively safe and secured camera settings while making use of these cameras. So this is one more area that I thought of focusing, because we also have a couple of corporate related cases where the company's laptops, which were placed in the what do you say, typically the bedrooms of the respective employees, the webcam got switched on. It captured unwarranted videos, and then a lot of things got uploaded on the YouTube, leaving them exposed, not with just regard to their job, also with regard to their moral character. I think this is one more area that has to be looked at from a cyber legal perspective. And I think slowly these are moving out to be the most dangerous things with the passage of time. And more specifically, we do not know the picture behind the curtains. So this is going to be very interesting scenarios, and we're all presently in a leaking ecosystem. So we do not know where the data leak is going to actually originate from, and more specifically in the light of these applications, because we do not have an idea what is exactly going to happen and when we are going to be hit, or what is actually going to be targeting us. So in this kind of a scenario, we're all going to be under the heat, and it's globally all across, and that could bring in a lot of big waves of legal litigation, good, bad, or worst.
All right. And what about while we are using or surfing stuff on mobile phones, because there is a front camera? Does this thing happen with the mobile phones and mobile cameras as well?
I don't want to name the particular pieces of mobiles, but I would tell you that refrain from using certain mobiles which have been coming from the same place as our coronavirus has actually originated. So I would not be naming that, but I would tell you that there are lots of brands of phones which have been originating from that particular country. So I would say that just because you feel that there is a fancy for that model, do not do that, because I have seen numerous cases wherein these particular phones, they have a front camera on the top, and apart from that, there are some applications which could be made use of to specifically capture your video without your consent. And all that you can do is, if you are using any of that mobiles, there is a microfilm which is available. You need to go and put that go to a mobile repair shop. Typically in the we have Indian Jugaad school of management everywhere across. If you're in Hyderabad, there is something which is there, which is in Delhi specifically. You have a place called Nehru Place. So there are a lot of places that are notorious. So if you go there, they would be able to tell you, and they would be able to place that microfilm on your front camera, so as to ensure that these kinds of issues can be avoided.
All right. So microfilm would avoid what it would avoid. So we would be able to click our pictures. All right.
No, we would
all
be
right.
able to
So
click, but it will not be enabling others to actually make use of that vulnerability which was there in that phones, specifically those countries' phones.
All right. Thank you.
Next slide, please. So I thought of just bringing in some cyber security guidelines in general for educators. So have proper legal policies for online classrooms, stipulate guidelines with regard to video sessions, and even have specific guidelines for faculties apart from students. So have a demarcation. And if you're trying to adopt the digital classrooms, have an online digital education policy. Share that with all the parents and take their consent, so as to ensure that you have done your due diligence, and have data protection agreements. They could also be signed electronically through email by using digital signature or electronic signature, or you could just take a consent through email. I think data protection guidelines are a must with regard to the students, faculty, as well as any third party thereof. And stipulating a privacy policy is very, very important. a privacy policy has to be stipulated from a student's as well as a faculty's perspective, so as to ensure that their privacy is being protected. Next slide, please.
All right. Advocate Sushant, I have got a question here. So, what if schools are not following the policies or they are unaware of these policies? Thus, and I'm sure, as you mentioned, that 99% of the schools and the other organizations are not aware of these policies. So, if they have not get these things signed or displayed to the parents, or if they are themselves unaware of, what could be the repercussions on the schools?
An interesting question. Two kinds of exposures, civil and criminal. So civil could be damages by way of compensation. I think this is going to pose in a lot of different challenges, because the moment you see 10 students' data being breached, I think your damages would go into 10 times. And more specifically, that I would like to tell you is that the Information Technology Act, when it was amended, the cap of 1 crore, which was a limitation for suing people, was removed. So which means that unlimited damages, if I'm able to prove that there is certain amount of damage which is costing approximately so much that is attached to my data, I think I could be sued for so much. So more specifically in the domain of online education, I think this is one area. And even there could be imprisonment and cases being filed upon by the schools and the colleges, and also on the faculty for non-compliance to these regulations. I think that this could be a very, very big amount of nothing danger for all of these as time passes by.
All right. So schools, those who are unaware, would not be able to be aware of this thing unless and until something happens, or if they are being sued. Is that right? That if they are unaware, if they don't update themselves, it is. I mean, they can still be sued, or only when they will be sued, they will get to know that there could be repercussions like this.
Yes, obviously, because we are not living in a proactive environment. The question here is that, see, when you look at the physical world versus virtual world, I'll give you a small example you can relate with very fast. For example, when you're driving on the road, you have a basic knowledge on the traffic rules. For example, wearing a seatbelt and stopping on the red, and then whenever there is a speed limitation, follow that speed limitation. But if you're doing the same thing online, if you're participating in the same driving online, I don't think that any one of us would actually look into this, because we are so unaware, and then good, bad, or worst, whatever be the reason, we are totally unaware, and we are living in a totally different environment altogether, which we think is not governed by any statutory rules or regulations. So I think this is a very big, thorough misconception. But slowly, I think now schools and colleges are slowly trying to understand that there is a requirement of this, more specifically that because now being cybercrimes are increasingly going at a rampant pace, and then there's a chance that the school could be either sucked in as a plaintiff or as a defendant in any case. So all I'm trying to tell them is that we are all going out in rain or a storm. So I am advising them that please carry a raincoat. If you don't do that, you can still get wet. But however, if you still carry a raincoat, you can still get wet. But what I want to tell you is when you get wet in that kind of a scenario, you can also seek the legal remedy, which is nothing but the legal shield, the armor of protection that the law gives you. So I think this is one great thing that schools have to very quickly realize before they proceed further, because it's going to bring in a lot of different challenges, more specifically in the light of these pandemic situations, because we do not have any clue or any hint whether the lockdowns will be further extended or not. No idea on the examination patterns, no idea on the further classes. I think this is going to pose in a lot of different challenges which schools and colleges have to keep in mind before they go forward.
All right. But another question is, like, we have got ISO certifications and implementation of these policies, different standards, and then there are audits which are conducted. What kind of certificate or standards schools can implement while they are going ahead for hosting and conducting online classes?
A very interesting question. So two things that you can probably make use of. So there is one, ISO 27001. You're largely compliant with the regulations. But the second aspect is that we have something called Section 43A IT Act compliance, so which we call as cyber law compliance. In fact, I'm one of the 45 cyber law auditors in the country. So what we probably do is we do an audit for these applications, and then we don't give a certificate, but all these policies are itself demonstrative of your legal compliance under this particular Section 43 Act, 80 Act compliance. I think this is the only way that you can ensure documented due diligence. Having privacy policies, terms and conditions, grievance mechanisms, and the specific data protection agreements, and as I mentioned, the kinds of guidelines that we are having. I think all of us are still in the learning world, because this kind of a scenario has never happened so far. So it's going to bring in a lot of different challenges, and focal trust is going to be on cyber laws and cyber security as we adopt more to digital world. I think this has to be something that we have to quickly realize. So the moment you're complying with this, I think you have done your due diligence, and then now you can make use of the legal shield or the armor that the law is giving you, because Section 79 of the IT Act is one such tipping point. Why? Because it says that the moment I'm complied, I'm exempt from liability. So my liability as an educational provider or as an intermediary is zero if I'm able to demonstrate document due diligence. Because
All
if
right.
I'm able to do that, don't be under the misconception that just because I have these policies, I'm free from getting attacked. So that's a very big misconception. This is just to tell you that in case you're being attacked, or in case you are being put to a cybersecurity breach, your exposure and your liability is going to be bare minimum of absolutely zero under this particular Section 79. So that's why I was trying to emphasize on this aspect. So some more areas
So
that I want to focus quickly here is
yeah,
yeah, please
before
go ahead.
that, just another question. Does this mean that if schools have got policies, terms and conditions in place, and they are signed by their clients, that is the parents of the students they are mentoring, and even if they don't go for the complete audit, they are still safe in the eyes of the law? Is that right?
Correct, correct. So they don't. They still there's no requirement for having a certificate in place, but have the right things. See, I will tell you one more area. Privacy policy. What has to be part of privacy policy is clearly mentioned in the IT rules 2011, specifically rule number 3, subsection 1 and subsection 2. So if you are trying to have a privacy policy, I would advise you that you do some homework in that regard, because you just cannot say that I have a privacy policy for the name of it. For the name, I can have it. I cut, copy, paste it from the internet. I'm done. So that's not all it, but there are some stipulated guidelines regarding what has to be covered under the privacy policy. For example, the data that is being collected, the sensitive data that is being collected, the purpose, the security measures that you have in place, to whom all is it shared, why is it shared, and what kinds of disclosures am I doing to that information or data. And in case if something goes wrong, what are the grievances, the grievance mechanism that I have to go into. I think typically if a privacy policy is able to address any of these, and all of these rather, I will say all of these, then ideally it should be a good to go privacy policy so as to comply with this particular legislation. I think India does not, as of today that I'm talking to you, does not have a dedicated data protection law or data privacy law. So I think the personal data protection bill is in the pipeline, but nevertheless, I think with the present situation warranting us to go digital, this could be the mantra that you could probably make use of. So some guidelines, just previous slide, please, quickly. Yeah, so some things that I was talking to you about, cybersecurity guidelines. So have an intellectual property privacy policy, so that it's going to cover the content. Being a school or educational institution, like I said, you should not amount to copyright infringement. Same thing. Now there are lots of insurance companies coming up with cyber or data insurance. I think you should try considering them, because in case of a cyber attack, I think you would have certain amount of insurance coverage in that regard. Grievance mechanism is one more area, and then updating your policies also is going to play an important role. And I would recommend having a policy for online attendance, as well as for displaying the classroom schedules. So if you have a schedule for the classes which are likely to happen this week, next week, and if you've not still published the complete schedule, have a dedicated policy so as to ensure that you have done your due diligence with regard to the classroom schedule. So these are some areas that I thought of sharing it with you. Next slide, please. So the fundamental aspects that I would like to talk of here is be sensitized. So it's not sensitization doesn't mean that you are going to do a degree in this area. I would say that no need of formal education. Sensitize yourself about the practices that you have to follow, whether you're a student or a faculty or an education institution. Have proper sensitization on the cyber security, cyber laws, and the like. And then please look at abusing. Please look at reporting abuse, and also look at sanitizing not just your hands but also your photographs, and also security settings in case you're using the platforms like Zoom and the like, and do report of any abuse to 𝗖𝘆𝗯𝗲𝗿 and then change the platform in case you immediately have any attack being contemplated. Now, cyber resilience is going to be the new learning, shall I say. It's going to be the tip of the iceberg, because how quickly can you come back to normalcy in case you're hit with an attack? So this is one area that increasingly schools and colleges who are migrating to the digital environment need to really stay focused on. I think if this is going to be the new flavor of the times, and if you're quickly going to have a cyber resilience plan, I think that is going to help you in order to ensure smooth running of your online classrooms during this period of pandemic. So I would say that two things here before I conclude. There is something that we're calling this as a pandemic situation, but more dangerous than that, there is something called infodemic that is happening. So we are getting exposed to a lot of information, especially relating to Corona, COVID-19 and pandemic. So my advice is, do not click on unsolicited links, websites, or do not keep subscribing to any application that gives you alerts on this particular area. So there's going to be infodemic versus pandemic. I think it's going to be completely a new tip of the iceberg, and without having adequate protection, I think it's going to be a historical mistake. And then without cyber security and cyber law, it's going to be a toothless wonder that you're going to likely to face when you're migrating to the concept of digital learning. I think the culture of cyber security has to be adopted. Due diligence is the need. Updating your browsers, it's a very, very important aspect that you need to comply when you're using laptops, and more specifically having these policies. And like I said, we're all in the transition of a new cyber world, and the world is going to see a totally different paradigm altogether, and there's going to be a lot of emerging cyber legal principles that are going to come up. And then primarily, I would say that we're going to see the trinity of sisters that are coming up. What? Three things: increase in cyber crimes, increasing in cyber security breaches, and fake news. These three are going to be the trinity of sisters that we're all going to encounter during this period of pandemic. I think what is necessary is only what is required. So that is the reason. I know it's a very, very vast topic that could be talked of, but in a short span of time, I think we cannot walk the walk completely without being aware of the basic principles. So it's for this purpose that I thought of just sharing it with you, that these are some basic due parameters that you need to keep in mind as a school, as an education institution, as a parent, as a student, and as a faculty. So next slide, please. So this is all that I have from my side. So I would advise that let us not close ourselves to the sun and say that sun has gone away. So let's all do a lot of capacity building in this area. Try to effectively implement and formulate strategies and policies so as to counter and protect ourselves in this digital environment, and then ensure that we're reasonably protected. And then I must say that we're all under heat, good, bad, or worst. I think for our own selfish interests, I think we'll have to weather the storm and bring about a new horizon in the online education industry. So that's all I have from my side. It's been a pleasure talking to all of you, specifically Pooja. I thank you for this wonderful opportunity, and it's been a real pleasure talking to all of you this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Advocate Sushant. I believe that it's our pleasure to have you on board and educate our viewers about the cybersecurity. So I believe that we can conclude by saying that this is not just important for educators, students, or parents. If schools are already following the policies and the terms and conditions in their schools, which is not in majority of the cases, I believe, they still need to learn about how to use their devices well. They still need to learn about how to be socially active, how they can still protect themselves being socially active. And not just for educators in schools, it is equally important for parents and kids to know how they're using their devices, kids to know how to use it. I actually like the fact when you mentioned that if terms and conditions and policies are there and if they are signed, we can still save ourselves, which I believe is a very important point for educators. Another bit is to sanitize our pictures before we are uploading. Try to avoid uploading our pictures as much as possible, and to ensure that we have got antiviruses uploaded on our systems. So I believe this whole program is very important. It was extremely required because probably we may not see its relevance as of now, but tomorrow when one or the other person is hit, definitely we will try to educate ourselves. But then we are coming even way before that, which is absolutely a great thing. I'm really grateful, and LivesBerg Technologies is really grateful that you have come on this platform. You have shared so much of knowledge with us, and it is a great thing. Awareness and versus being ignorant. I believe that awareness is always a great thing. So we are really thankful that you are here. All right, audience. So next time as well, we are going to come up with something amazing, which is we always ensure that the webinars which we are conducting are actually helping you. There are takeaways for you, which are going to help you, your family, your kids, and as an organization as well. So next time as well, we are going to come up with something interesting which you can use and which would be beneficial for you. Advocate Sushant, we are grateful to have you on the platform, and we say thank you to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, audience. So we're gonna meet you and see you in our next webinar or our next video. Thank you so much, and bye-bye.